Welcome to my podcast, I Think I Can. My intention for the podcast is for individuals to begin a transformational journey towards self-awareness and self-actualization. And I do this by telling my own story, as well as all the stories from my past clients. And I do this so that you too can feel safe knowing that change is available to you, but also so you can take more responsibility for your life in 3 specific ways: in your health, your self, and your wealth. Now sit back and enjoy the show. So if you're somebody that's gone through any sort of betrayal, you know how much suffering you do in silence and how your worst fears have, seemingly manifested, and how difficult it is to trust again. You're going to want to listen to this podcast episode because it's all about this, plus it gets much deeper. My guest today was Jaclyn Shaw, and she's a true testimony of what it takes to step into your fears and the importance of getting guidance when you're dealing with your worst fear, as well as the importance of going into deep contemplative thought and silence with yourself, and how spirituality helped becoming more spiritual and going on her own spiritual journey helped her so much through all of this. It's just a damn good episode. If you haven't listened to, many of my other episodes, listen to this one because there's so many golden nuggets in this one that I know every single person listening to this will draw from. And with that, enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I Think I Can podcast. Today, I have a special guest. All my guests are special, but today I have with me Jaclyn Shaw. And Jaclyn Shaw is a mentor that I've had for the past several months, actually. And she's an amazing mentor and coach. She is most known for taking her clients to the depths of their knowing, their most intimate truth, and to be able to activate their authentic voice. So doesn't that sound good, right, guys? So yeah, Jaclyn has helped me out quite a bit with all that. And so welcome, Jaclyn.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And man, as you said, we've worked together the past few months. I was just feeling into that. I'm like, wow, it was a few months ago already that we saw each other, that we got to meet in person. And really for the better part of this year, we've been working together. And I remember the first mastermind call that we had together and that you and I had our first interaction. And so I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, no, it lights me up. It's coming from my gut to have you here today. It's definitely it's great because I know you have so much wisdom to give to my audience as well. And yeah, okay, so and I was thinking too, Jaclyn, we have a lot in common. I'm a little behind you in many ways, but honestly, I attract the same type of women to my practice, and that's women who want to discover again who they are, because of after years of being pulled in so many different directions, they want to find out who they are. They want to find their voice again, find their truth, and and just even simple things like our love of nature. I mean, as I speak to you, you're in the forest in BC, and nothing I mean, that's what brings us to our spirituality, So, yeah.
Yeah. And I feel as I hear you say that as well, it's like leading women. And when I say like leading women back to their truth, so the sacred wisdom within, it's like not even finding themselves in the sense of like it doesn't already exist. It's like
Yeah.
that remembering. It's like remembering who we are, remembering the divinity within, the sacred wisdom that we have within. And so much of my work really does start with helping women really stepping into themselves, like harnessing their personal power so they can stand in this conviction and truth of who they are and then speak it out into the world. This is the part that's like activating their authentic soul voice.
Yeah, and at first they're going to hit a lot of fears, right? I mean, that's what's stopping people all the time, really, is stepping into that. Like,
Yeah, the fears, right? It's unknown. There's resistance. There's
yeah,
our humanness that comes into play. Like there's so much because that's not how we've been operating throughout most of our human journey.
exactly. We've been conditioned up to a certain time, and then yeah, and it's not easy. And sometimes we don't even like it's coming back to ourselves, but I think sometimes we've gone we strayed off so far in another direction that it's not an easy thing. But I think to me that's what spirituality is. It's the pursuit of yeah of finding out who or coming back, who was I always, and it's a beautiful thing. I think some people are scared about it, like they're scared that it's this awful journey, or that they're going to go through the dark night of the soul. And actually you probably will. Like, I mean, it's not always wonderful to do this, but what's on the other side of it is what feels just addictive and wonderful.
Well, I think the thing with this is as well, it's like it is definitely not always easy. And at the same time, like to be in the truth of who we are, to be in the connection with nature, with God, with divinity, like it is our natural state. So it's like this,
Mm.
like, is it easy? It's like, well, it's our natural state, but it's not an easy journey. And I think part of the reason, and there's so many reasons why it's not an easy journey, but often when I start working with clients as well, it's like once they are in this space of like really desiring, wanting to like stand in their power, stand in the conviction of who they are, like this remembrance has been activated, then what often comes up is a lot of shame, a lot of guilt around the ways in which they've betrayed themselves, essentially, like, not following their intuition or
Mhm.
wishing like they can look in hindsight and be like the times where they were stepping out of alignment or they didn't stand in their power, they didn't use their voice. So then that brings up more to, heal, to work through, because it's like, then we shame ourselves for like being human, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so interesting that like we're talking about this morning, because I have one of my clients, and it's almost the exact conversation. And I'd love to step into this with you. It was surrounding feeling betrayed, and I know that, and I want you to speak about your journey with that, because it's such a powerful journey, and I think it's going to help so many of my listeners. But her particular, um, it's actually very similar. So I'll just share it. I mean, she picked up her fiance's phone and saw, a pop-up window for porn come up. And they've had this discussion. Like they had a very open discussion about her thoughts on using porn, and his thoughts on it, and saying, yeah, that's nothing I want to participate in anymore. And so this comes up, and at she followed her gut hit intuition, and she said, are you like looking at this stuff again? And he denied it. He just said, no. But then few hours later, a few hours later, a few hours later. And she said, you know what, I just have to ask you one more time. Like, is this something that you're doing now? And then it came out. Yeah, he said, yeah, I'm really trying to work on it. Da, 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 da. And so we discussed that. And I really just congratulated her. I said, that's amazing. Like, your gut told you, like, that's great. And you should feel really good about that. And the other part of this is that this is very, very normal conversation that you guys had. Like, it's not, oh my God, we've gone back to square one. It's sort of like, no, there's going to be this dance back and forth, but it's those couples that don't have these uncomfortable conversations are the couples that you tend not to do well
Mm.
in their future marriage or their marriage period. So maybe you can comment on that, and then we can kind of get into how the same thing sort of happened with you, but even worse, if you want to say
Well,
it like that.
I'd say same, but very different. And one thing that I really, and the reason why I'd say very different, not worse, is like, I remember through my healing journey when there was betrayal in my marriage, that I had these moments. I had these moments where I was like, okay, but my hurt, my pain, my trauma is not as bad as someone else's, or someone else has it worse than me. So like, am I allowed to feel what I feel? And this is
Mm.
where it's like, we really can't compare each other's
Mm.
my pain to her pain. We really can't compare like the feeling of betrayal, the traumas, because like we each are in our own experiences here.
And that's a very good comment to bring up as well, because she even said that to me. She says, Luella, am I making this too big of a deal? Like, I mean, she's second guessing herself. And I said, well, no, because it comes back to your standards and your values. And you made this very clear in previous conversations. So again, you're doing exactly what you need to be doing,
Mm.
with this. And so she felt some, like, a little bit of shame, or like, am I overdoing that? Am I asking too much? Am I not being, and therefore she consulted me. But you got to also realize, I told her, like, he felt so much shame and guilt, and that's why he went out of alignment and lied to you essentially. And so and now he's going to seek, you know therapy, or whatever it's therapy, coaching, whatever it is for anybody. But it's just not allowing, like, just having a really strong boundaries, and not allowing this to continue. Otherwise the conversation will continue throughout your marriage. So
Well, and I feel like this is where so often it's easy. And I mean, I'll get into and share my story, but I
yeah.
remember the feeling. I remember the moment of wanting to just like pretend it doesn't exist, like put the band-aid on, just be like, let's pretend, let's just like
Mm-hmm.
fix it. Let's just like not tell anyone. Do you know what I mean? Like these
Mm-hmm.
moments. And what you said a few minutes ago, I really just want to highlight, because I think this is so important. Like when you congratulated her, it's like you're having the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So many times I feel like we're not willing to have the conversations. And I think, again, like you said, like that's where relationships really get into, trouble. I remember being interviewed on this podcast a few years ago, being asked, like, how do you trust your husband again after, this betrayal that happened within your marriage? And I was like, honestly, like, because now, like, our level of communication, where we're at, like, is completely different than where we were at before. So it's like, I know that we can have hard conversations. I know that we're not just gonna, like, try to put the blankets on top or the band-aid on top and just pretend things don't exist. It's like there's such open lines of communication. And I think this is when you're willing to have the hard conversations, even though it feels painful in the moment. It feels hard. It feels like, I don't know what that answer is going to be, but am I willing to ask the question? Am I willing to speak my truth versus like hold it inside?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I really feel like that's really the crux of, like, why so many relationships fall apart. It's because we're caught in our fears, you
And
know. Yeah.
yeah, we're caught in our fears, and then we're afraid to speak, have the conversations with our
Mm.
partner. And then oftentimes, well, in my case, at least, I was like, I remember feeling so much shame that I didn't have anyone to turn to, that I couldn't have conversations. And then guess what? That left me feeling like more alone and more alone and more alone. And so even just like
Mm.
the beginning of this conversation, we've thrown at words like the shame and the trauma and the pain. And it's like, seeing how quickly things, I mean, the quick version of my story is when I was 3 months pregnant with my daughter, I found out that my husband was having an affair. And I literally found out the moment it started. My intuition, and it's wild because when people say, like, your intuition told you, there must have been signs. Like, it was literally like, I was so blindsided. Everyone in our world was blindsided when they found out. And yet I just like had this moment. I had this knowing. It was like, oh, this is what's happening in your marriage, like right now in this moment. And I wanted to be like, no, like literally the first was like, you're crazy. Like, that would, like, Craig's the last person. Like, how could you even think that?
Mm.
And then it was like, no, like, pay attention. And I asked, and there was the denial. And then I asked again. And then when the truth came out, like, again, within like 24 hours of it even beginning, I remember like my mom and my sister were at my house with my son. And I was like, just pretended that everything was great and everything was okay. And then I hopped on a plane and flew to Florida with my son and was sitting on the beach and just like, while things were not okay, while I was crumbling, like everyone around me just thought I was going on this like vacation for a few days to get out of the winter, to get out of the cold. And at the time, I felt so much shame. I was like, what will people think of me? What does that mean about me if my husband can have an affair while I'm pregnant?
And that's crazy. Like
Isn't it?
when you think about it now, like it's just it's crazy that our minds would go there. And you're right, like the fear, and that's what I said to her today too. The fear, the guilt, and the shame. I mean, they're such close cousins, and they really isolate you, like terrible, in a terrible, terrible way. Um,
Well, and it's wild because immediately it was so interesting in looking back in hindsight, because immediately I made it mean something about me. But then also at the same time, when I did tell the first person who was like a best friend from my childhood, when I did tell him, I also said to him, I'm like, I know this is going to sound crazy, but like, it's not about me. And he was like, what do you mean it's not about you? Like, it's your marriage. It's about you. And I was like, I just know it's not about me.
Mm, which is really powerful as well. Like, I mean, and maybe the reflection, the contemplative thought that you did, and maybe the responding and not reacting allowed you, like it gave you maybe that time to realize that this is actually not about me. Would you say that's true?
And I
Okay.
mean, in hindsight too, when people would ask me, like, how could this happen while you were pregnant? And I was like, there was no option for it to happen. I feel like from the universe at any other time, because any other time I would have went into like strong
Mm,
reaction mode. I would
good
have,
point.
yeah, like I know myself, and I know,
Yeah, I know.
this really embarked for me, this, experience in 8 months while we were separated. And while I was pregnant with my daughter, like I went on a deep spiritual journey. So while I can say like it wasn't about me, I also know it happened for me, which I did not feel at the time when it was happening. But it was like, yeah, I couldn't turn to like alcohol or just like being like, fuck you, and going to do the same thing or
Mm.
whatever it was. It was like, no, I had to really look at my reactions. I had to look at also, my choices, like where I would typically choose to like, sit in anger and sit in rage, and recognizing like I had the power, and that I could feel honestly like my power rising in a sense that was like, what do I want to choose for myself? Do I want to choose, to fight? Do I want to choose the drama? Or do I want to choose like peace? And at that time, I was like, I need to choose peace. I need to find ways to choose peace, not only for myself, but literally for the health of my baby girl.
Yeah, no, I never thought about that before, like what you're speaking about, like pregnancy and your hormones, going more all towards the nurturing side of a woman, right? The caring, nurturing side of a woman. And it probably did make a big difference then. And I love that you brought that up. The other thing I want to bring up, that something that you said, is that, when you said, like, it was just, it happened for me, not to me. And no one would have thought this was going to happen to us. Like, I can imagine a lot of women out there are, hearing that, are going, oh my God, like, what is happening, in my own marriage? Like, what do you mean? Like, you had no clue? Like, how can I trust my husband hearing this, or whatever, my partner hearing this? But also, like, finish listening to this, like, Jaclyn's story here, because it turned out to be like a beautiful gift for herself. So I just want to let people know that no matter what happens to them in life, it like the hardest things to deal with. I'm not saying that it's always going to be easy to look back and say, well, that was worth it, or I would do it all over again. But just doing exactly what you did, going towards the peace, like, what's going to make me feel the most peace right now? What does my body need right now? Does my body need to fight, or does my body need to relax into this acceptance?
Yeah. And this is where, like, normally for me, I'd say I would go into like the fight or flight or, whatever. And it was like I had to form new pathways. And this, when you said there, like, yeah, I could say, like, everything happens for a reason, or it happened for me, not to me. That's also, like, not what anyone needs to hear when they're going through experiences like this. And so it's not about, I want to make it so clear, it's not about just like bypassing it, being like, oh, well, it's just happening for me, so like everything gets to be, I get to choose peace. Like, that wasn't it at all. But there was this like deep sense in knowing that I was going to be okay. Like, right from the beginning, I was like, I was going to be okay. And that there was an underlying, like, something's in this journey for me. And when I look back in hindsight now, I can see how, this was really a deep dive into spirituality for me. And before that, spirit, God, the universe had knocked on my door plenty of times. And I feel like I just kind of kept slamming the door, being like, no, 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 no. And then this is why it's like this experience. Well, it sounds wild to say, like, being separated from my husband for 8 months while I'm pregnant with my daughter and I have a 2-year-old son at home. Do I wish it wasn't part of our story? Like, of course. And yet I'm so grateful for so many elements of it. I'm grateful that I, didn't choose to be the victim, that I chose to like really do my own healing work at this time. I'm really grateful, to my husband, that at first when I wanted to throw the Band-Aid solution on, that he was like, no, there's something like not right here. Like, that's just like, and I can tell you if that would have happened, like, I can't even imagine where we would have been at now, because the anger, the sense of, the lingering sense of betrayal. Like, if I didn't do the forgiveness work that I did, you know what I mean? So it's like there, again, yeah, well, I can say I wish that wasn't an experience that I've had in this lifetime. It's also what led me into, I would really say, like, who I am today, how I lead today, the communication I have in my marriage today, so many things I teach on and lead with my clients, the trust, the surrender, the power of choice. What happens when we choose, when we make the decision to not be the victim and to rise in our power.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so, like, I mean, we're all going to go into the victim stage, I think, initially when something like this would happen in our lives. I can only imagine, why did this happen to me? Why me? And then, you mentioned moving through that and just going towards trust and trusting that you will be okay. Like that's a very important um milestone to reach, I think, in this journey, right, of spiritualism. Like I know I will be okay. Like that's huge, huge.
Yeah, so things interestingly happen like very rapidly for me. And like I said, like I would not say I had a deep, I had dabbled, I had like toe dipped in
Right.
spirituality. Like there was like, I was like in and out and in and out. Like when it served me, I was like, ooh, let's turn to prayer. When it doesn't, I'm just, so I had this
Mm-hmm.
like relationship of dabbling in and out. I was raised Catholic. So I had all these like weird thoughts about God and just like, things that didn't align, things I didn't believe in. So like that's kind of where I was sitting in at this point. But when I say things happened very rapidly for me, it was like, okay, so I found out my husband was having the affair. I told my friend and just had this moment of like, and I don't even know where this, what I would now say was wisdom came from. It wasn't like it wasn't a voice I heard. But it was literally just this knowing inside of me was, it's not about you. And then the next day I was literally like pushing my son in the park. And those like these things that you just like remember exactly where you were. You remember like the
Yeah.
flowers you saw, you
Yeah.
remember the clothes you were wearing. And
Yeah.
I remember having this feeling and sending my husband a message like, I'm going to be okay. And our baby's going to be okay. And our kids are going to be okay. Like we're going to be okay. And I just had this feeling of like, I'm going to be okay. And I was like, but I don't feel okay. And I'm like, but it was just the sense of like, I'm going to be okay. And then I had, it was a few weeks later, I had, some girlfriends who were very enraged at all the happenings in my world and enraged that when I wanted to, work things out with my husband, that he chose to pack up and move into this other woman's house. And they would send me pictures. They would send me pictures of like, oh, like this is what she posted on Instagram. This is this. And I was just like, I sent them all an email. Like it was like group email. I think there was about 7 of them on it. And it was like, every time I see you guys are sending me pictures like this, like I know you're doing it from a place of love. It makes me feel like a victim. And I just don't feel like I'm a victim here. And I was like, and that email said like, there's something in this for me. And I can feel this, like, I can feel it. I can feel it rising within me. And I don't know what it is, but like, I need you to not send me things like that because I need to not feel like a victim right now.
Good. Well, because it doesn't help. Like, I mean, that's not the catalyst for change.
But here's the thing. It's like where we want to go. It's like, and this
I
is where
know.
for myself, like I had to really bring a lot of awareness into like when I wanted to choose like the self-righteousness, when I wanted to choose like, yeah, I deserve to be pissed off. I deserve to be out for revenge. I deserve, all of the things like I deserve to be because of what he chose or what this or that. And it's like, do I want to, my whole entire life, I always wanted to be right. My whole entire life, it's like I would do anything to prove that I was right. And this is really when I was like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want to choose anger or do you want to choose peace? And peace was really, the word that I anchored into again and again and again. And when I say, my daughter really, I was giving birth to her, but I feel like she was giving birth to me. She was nurturing me as I was carrying her because in between my 2 children, I had 2 second-term miscarriages. There was a lot of health complications with my daughter at this time while she was, growing inside of me. So I was really like, I lost 10 pounds in 10 days when I first found out. I was like, I think I was down to like 108 pounds or something like that when I was 3 months pregnant. And I was like, I have to choose peace. Like I have to, or else they thought she was going to be born 3 months early. There were so many things going on that I was like, if I don't find a way to actually like figure out how my body can continue to hold her. So it was choosing peace. I had tried to meditate for like 3 years prior to this. And it was like, I got no option into like meditating, figuring out how to meditate like 6 times a day because I knew like that my daughter's life literally depended on how I could, feel in my own body at this
Oh my
point.
God. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, when you use the words deserve and blame too, like, again, that's like to me another close cousin to shame and guilt and fear, and yeah, trauma. Like it's just
Mm-hmm.
like it's so easy to choose those words, the self-righteousness, that we're because and you know what, I think that's like sort of like like it's sort of like a root chakra sort of like response, right? This like instinctual, like justice for all,
Yeah.
it's such a low, yeah, in the totem pole for like ascension sort of thing, right? Like it's so easy to choose that, but yeah, like it really sounds like it was so divinely orchestrated, all of this for you, like when you look
Yeah.
back, right? I mean, it's
And this is the thing, right? When I was like, I didn't need anyone telling me at the time, like, oh, this is happening for you, but like you don't know what happens on the other side. But again, it's like I can see it. I can see
Mhm.
it in hindsight. Like I can see I very much feel in the spirit of my daughter that she was the same baby that I had the second miscarriage with, that the timing wasn't right. Like she knew like she needed to come at this time.
Yeah, wow, that's another thing that's just, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So
Well, I want to just like share one more thing that's just like coming through for
mhm.
me to share right now as we're having this conversation, because when you said the like the shame that comes in and the deserving to, be, want this like, deserving to be angry, deserving all of the things, deserving that he should be punished, whatever it is. I mean, this is such, I think, a hard topic for people to listen to. It's a hard
Mhm.
conversation for people to have. It's like, no, like she should have done this, or she should have like, I've talked a lot on different podcasts about my experience in healing from infidelity. I've coached a lot of women through healing their experience with infidelity. And that doesn't mean, the path I've chosen. That doesn't mean healing so that you remain in your marriage. I've coached women that have been divorced for 3 years, but they're still, healing from that experience. I've coached women who are choosing to remain in their marriage, women who are choosing to leave. Like it's not like there's one solution
Mm.
here at all. But I feel like it's just important to be having these conversations. Cause like I said, like I felt so alone. I felt like who else can I have this conversation with? Because people get so heated about, this topic and triggered, because I mean, truthfully, most of us have been impacted by infidelity in some way, whether it's within our own relationship or past relationships
Mm.
or a parents or a siblings or a friend. And so we have all these thoughts, all these feelings. Like I definitely before this experience was like, I would never, ever, ever, ever like tolerate this. Like I would leave his ass, like, all of the
Mhm.
things. And it was so fascinating because that was my initial, my initial response. And then I just had again this knowing inside of me of like, no, like that's not
Mm.
it. Like your story's not over. So as many times I wanted to like, there was like this very like angry human side of me that wanted to be like, no, like of course, like I would never forgive you. My soul was calling on something else. And so it
Yeah.
was like, can I trust in where my soul is leading me versus like choosing that, human, whether you call it like your human ego or that fear or that whatever it is. It's like, I thought I knew what I would decide and I didn't.
No, and like it's so pivotal that you went in isolation too, that you left and you isolated yourself because you were able to listen to the silence then. Otherwise, like I know I've seen this too. It's sort of like when women, like I find women tend to flock together, and all these girlfriends trying to like protect you and everything, and it's great to talk, but at the same time I know a lot of those conversations become, you don't deserve this, and
Yeah.
and it's always their best attention, right? Like, you deserve, we love you, we know who you are as a person, you don't deserve this. But like, for anybody listening out there right now, you have to realize that your relationship is so unique to yourself, right? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
have to go inside yourself, and not like, there's no coach, therapist, or whatever that's going to put you through some sort of formula, and just say, okay, you guys come out here, then this is what you need to do. Like that's not possible. Like, a lot of this work has to be done in isolation or like individual.
Yeah. And I think, well, I think even important, it's like, I mean, I feel like once I did start sharing, I was very supported. I was very
Okay.
supported. So not in isolation, like I was very supported by some soul sisters. I was very supported by my family, but I also made it very clear, like I said, starting with that email to certain friends too, like that I wasn't available for certain conversations. I wasn't available for other people's opinions. I wasn't asking anyone else for advice. And I think this is why I'm so passionate about teaching women to find their wisdom within. I had a client recently say to me, she was in a space with me that was, I mean, it was just a really incredible space. It was a 7-day Voxer container, but there's 35 women in there. Each woman got to ask a question every day. So at the end of 7 days, there was like over 200 riffs in there from me. And one of the women reflected back at the end. She's like, I've sat here and listened to everything over the 7 days, like over 200 messages. And like, not once did you give advice. And that to me is also such a power of mentorship. Like, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to guide you into your own truth, your own wisdom. And so that's what I found I was really able to do during this time. And I had to confront a lot of like interesting things within myself. Even, when my husband and I were at the point in our journey about talking about, reconciling, I had to sit with myself and was like, okay, are you like, is this actually true? Is this what you want? Is this like where where you're feeling called? Like, do you want to heal your marriage, or are you trying to win? And it was like, no one else could answer that except for me. And so I had to be willing. And yes, I had mentors that I was working with. I had soul sisters I was talking with, but really from a place of like, again, it was all guiding me back to my own inner wisdom.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm glad you made that clear. It's true. Like, I mean, it's not to say that you need to do this alone. It's you absolutely 100% need a guide. And I love the word guide because that's what I always have felt as well. Like that's what I want, that's what I try to be. And it's but it's often guiding you to go inward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like because it's so easy to seek advice outward
Yeah.
or comparing yourself to, another girlfriend. How did she do it? Like how do most couples do it or whatever, but it's always like you two are your own unique specimen, like in some ways.
Yeah. And I find this is where what we kind of perpetuate is like this cycle of not feeling in our personal power because we're constantly giving our power away. It's like, okay, what do they think? What would they do? Even, I mean, we give our power away to like God, the universe, being like, oh, the universe has my back. It's like, well, what if I have my back? Like, what if I know that I have everything within me as well? And so it's like, then for me anyways, it's like then your relationship with the divine, your relationship with God, your relationship with the universe changes because it doesn't feel like, oh, there's something out here existing that has the power that I don't have.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I like energy leak. That's exactly what it is. When you start giving weight or gravity to other people's opinions and thoughts of you, that's where it can become very, very heavy in
Yeah.
your mind. Yeah.
And I think, and this is it. This is why I think it's really important to like, when you talked, we said like isolation there, but it's like, it's not isolation, but it's having your own time to sit with your own thoughts, your own beliefs, your own contemplations. Because I know something that you and I both feel very passionate about is that we don't feel that other women, that other humans are not feeling alone on their journey. So I would never want, the first 10 days where I didn't tell anyone, like, and I was so isolated, like, and I isolated myself like that. I mean, that's when I lost the 10 pounds in 10 days. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't supported in any way. Like that also wasn't healthy for me. But having, time where you are alone with your thoughts, with your beliefs, having time where you're in a safe, trusted space with, a mentor, a therapist, a guide, a coach, whatever that is, it's like I think it's so important that we have people with us on these journeys as well that really feel like they're those supportive people. I can't even tell you, and it's wild to think back, at the beginning of this conversation, even you and I said, like, people have different pains, different traumas. At the time, I literally thought that I was like the only person that this could have ever happened to. Like, I was like, there's like, well, and the one person who had told me it had happened, like, that's kind of what sparked it for me. Like, I mean, this is kind of wild. I was literally having a conversation with a friend on Facebook who I didn't chat with in a few years. And she told me that her husband had had an affair while she was pregnant. I was like, what the fuck? Like, my judgment came in, like, what the fuck? Who would do that? And it was like, oh, your husband's doing it right now. Like, it was just this knowing. And so I thought, like, we were the only two women. Like, I was thought, like, this doesn't happen in anyone else's marriages. And then the amount of women, since I started to share my story, the amount of women that have reached out to me with similar experiences, with, their partner having an affair while they were pregnant. They're like, again, I thought I was the only one. So it's so easy to feel so alone when we don't talk about it, when we
Yeah.
keep things bottled up inside. Even
Yeah.
when this is in a different realm, like when I had my miscarriages, I remember a friend saying, like, well, why would you tell someone when you're pregnant the third time before you're like at the safe mark or whatever it is? And I was like, it was never like, I never got to a safe mark. I was like, I was so thankful, in the fact that my first two miscarriages that were in the second term, like, people knew I had people to support me. I was like, I don't want to go through that alone. And when I shared that, the amount of women that, like, friends that I was really close with, that they were like, I've never told anyone I had a miscarriage. And I was like, God, because it happened, it happened the first trimester before people know. And it's like this idea of like, we have to go through things alone. And like, we're not meant to do it alone. We're not meant to do any of this alone. We're not meant to have our human experience, our soul expansion. We're not meant to, be here as entrepreneurs, like, alone.
No, exactly. I know, like, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, even the if we think about, like, I don't even know who this would be, but let's say Deepak Chopra or I mean Oprah. Like, do you not think that they have some sort of spiritual director that they think, talk to all the time, or something, right? I mean, that it's ludicrous to think that, we need to do that, or that, yeah, to have any shame around doing it. But I think, yeah, so it's a wonderful dance, I think, between, sitting back in deep contemplation and reflection and in silence, so that you can get to your soul, and while also reaching out for help at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember, I was not someone who had ever reached out for help. I was always like the strong one. I was always the rock. I was always the one everyone else came to. And so it was like, well, I mean, I didn't even know how to ask for help. And even as we're talking here, like, I look in hindsight and I feel like, gosh, I literally thought I had it all. And I didn't realize, like, how lonely I actually was, even though, I obviously felt alone before, because then when this experience happened in my life, I didn't feel like there was anyone I could talk to about it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. So, which tells me, like, people, we have to realize too, like, to try to find that person for yourself, like, right now, like, even if you don't, like, that, it's there's no such thing as that doesn't happen to me. Like, I'm not saying betrayal is going to happen to everybody, but, like, you are going to have difficult times in your life. It's a guarantee. I hate to say it, but it is, because we all know that, you know, I mean, happiness, like, yeah, there is no such thing. There's always going to be duality, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so why don't you have somebody in your corner right now to go to when that time comes to you, and do the work now. Now, I do want to respect your time, but I also want to ask you, how how did things play out with your husband? Because I think a lot of women are probably thinking, okay, yeah, this is who I am. I love the idea of, going back to who I am. I love the whole idea about being emotionally intelligent. However, like, I mean, that's the last thing he's going to do, seek out a guide. So, what happened with your husband through all this?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, I'm like, this is interesting because where I feel called to share with you is, of course, I mean, I talk so much about frequency and
Mhm.
energetics. And so in the beginning, I tapped into meditation. Like I said, like I learned how to meditate. I learned how to, like, before this, like, I mean, and it's so crazy probably for someone like you who knows me now, like I spend so much time in stillness and out in nature and
Mhm.
in communion with nature and the divine. And so like stillness and spaciousness is such a part of my life now, but before it was like, I mean, to even sit in Shavasana yoga, I was like, this is a waste of time,
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
what are we doing here? Like, come for the hot yoga, get my sweat on, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
But really it was like, I would wake up in the middle of the night and feel all this anxiety and was like, hey, like there's, again, I was trying to figure out new ways to like calm my bodies as I was growing my baby girl inside of me. And so I started off really, in meditation at various points in the day. And then I remember this, again, this moment, like in this meditation, it was like, just send him peace, like send your husband peace, send him love. And so I started in my meditations, like sending him peace, sending him love. And I was like, I don't even think he's open to receive. Like at this point, literally, like we were like blocked from each other. Well, I was blocked from his phone. And so like, there was not really like, there was no feeling that he was open to receive it, but I was like, I'm just going to keep sending it.
Mhm.
And then a few weeks went by, and then I was called to also send the woman that he was living with, like, now send her love. And it was like, like, I don't want to send her freaking love. Like, like this resistance
Mm.
that comes in. But I was like, at this point, I was in such like, I'm willing to follow all the guidance that I'm receiving. And so as much as I didn't want to, I was like, okay, I'm starting to like just send peace and love. And then what it felt was like infusing the experience with peace and love. I started to soften. I started to look at where I was in judgment of her, in judgment of him, where I wasn't, choosing love. And I mean, it wasn't the easiest thing, but I just felt called to. So I kept trusting in my soul's guidance. I trusted in my soul more than I trusted in what my human mind and my ego wanted to say. And things started to shift. Things started to soften. My husband would, come over to be with my son, and I could see a change in his energy. Like literally, this is going to sound weird, but like in the color of his eyes, like I could see opening
Or softening.
and I could see the softening. And um one day we just like opened up a conversation, and I immediately, put my walls up right away. Cause I was like,
Mhm.
I held on. I was like, my first reaction was to go into like the victimhood or the anger. So he had asked the question, I put my walls up. And then the next day I sent him a message, and I was like, that's not the truth of what I feel. But it was like, it's really hard to tell you my truth when you're living down the street with another woman. But I was like, I'm going to
Mm.
share my truth. And so it came from a place of like, I chose to share my truth. I chose to, not let my ego lead and let my soul lead. And even when I, put the walls up and I wasn't allowing my soul to lead, I was willing to say like, that's not my truth. And this is my truth.
Mm.
And from there, we just embarked on different conversations. He started to, he actually did start to see, at first he saw a therapist that he had seen when he was younger. And that didn't feel right. I mean, he did a few times, but that didn't feel right for him. And then, we were meant to see a human performance coach, is what the man that we saw like labeled himself, a human performance coach. We were meant to see him together. And then at the time that we were supposed to see him, my husband like bailed on it, but he started to see him by himself. And we both just went on our own healing journey. And then at one point after my daughter was born, I was, leaving the town, like leaving the city we had lived in together. And I just said to him, I said, if you are, we're in conversations, and I said, if you want to come with us, like if you want to come, I'm going to support you in, your relationship with your kids. I'm going to support you in your healing. I don't fully know what this looks like for us at this point. And I'm also like, okay with not knowing. And so it wasn't like immediately like, let's like just fix this. It was like, let's support each other while we're each healing. And we did, there was a lot of days sitting on the couch crying. There was a lot of hard conversations. There was a lot of sessions with this human performance coach where we had the first like real conversations of our relationship. I would say there was a lot of truth telling. And I mean, that right there, like we were willing to hear each other. We were willing to hold each other's pain. We were willing to, I mean, this is like, we were willing to like not be right. Like I didn't need to be right and he didn't need to be right. And that I think was like such a huge thing.
It's so true. Like I again, this is another conversation that I had this morning with another client too. It's sort of like you each get to have your own truth. That's what you're saying. And I know you're a strong believer of that. Like, I mean, it's there doesn't have to be a wrong or right. I mean, and then I think, that links back to your values as well. Because I think a lot of people, might feel like, well, no, there has to be a wrong or right. I mean, that's how our world is built on. There's things that are wrong and there's things that are right. But I mean, can you both honor, seeing things differently? But
so
yeah, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, so the biggest thing that allowed me to do this, I would say, because I very much, like I say, like when I was like, I call this experience my spiritual smackdown. And there was like a pre-spiritual smackdown Jack and an after. And pre-spiritual smackdown Jack was very black and white. Like this was right, this is wrong. Like there was no like, there's different lenses. There's multiple truths get to coexist. Like, no, it was like my truth exists and my truth is the right truth. And like, that's it. Was basically like end of story. And I was reading Marianne Williamson's book, A Return to Love. And I'm totally paraphrasing this here. So if you're a Marianne Williamson lover, like these words aren't exactly right, but there was a part where I was reading and it basically said like, when you have trouble, like seeing through like this lens, can you look through the eyes of God? And at this point I was like, nope, like I'm not God. I can't see through the eyes of God. Like, I don't even know how I feel about God. And I was like, okay, so how can I see the world? How can I see the situation? How can I see my husband? Like not through eyes of anger. And the next day when he came over, I was, pissed off at him because he hadn't shown up the day before or whatever he was supposed to for my son. And my son runs to the door when he shows up and like, he gets down, my husband gets down at my son's level and they just give each other big hugs. And I was like, my son can see him through the eyes of love. And so I was like, what if I look at the world through my son's eyes? And literally like, not even just my husband. I remember like walking through the park with my son and he would be like, when you're like trying to rush and get somewhere. And I slowed down. I was like, oh, this is the way he sees the flowers. This is when he reaches out and touches the tree. And I literally was like, let me try to see the world through the eyes of my son because his eyes are pure. His eyes are pure. His eyes are love. And so, even I remember moments once I started to really look at the world through the lens of my son and then through the lens of love, I could also see, my husband's pain. I could also see this other woman's pain. So then I was able to like stop judging either one of them, seeing either one of them as wrong because I could see like their humanness. I remember having a moment where I was like, I was the one leaving the city and I was like, I felt like I was abandoning my husband and I called his mother and I told her that and she's like, no, he's the one that abandoned you. Like, but you know what I mean? I was like, but when you like, I just wanted to like infuse love everywhere at this time. And so that was a big thing for me shifting into like not being right or wrong was like, what if I look at this through the lens of love? And through the lens of love, I believe there is no right or wrong. We're all here navigating, a lot of difficult things. We're all here navigating this human experience. And when we can do it from the frequency of love, I mean, that's where we can access forgiveness. This is where we access deeper levels of truth. This is where we access like our soul's wisdom, because like ultimately we are love. We are the expression of love.
Right. That's I love the way you put that, and it's so true because and I love the idea that you are talking about children because it's so true. Like, I mean, they're so innocent, and I also love the idea of the sense of imagination. It's and they're not living in this dualistic world either. There's no right or no wrong. There's a whole lot of gray, and they're all about forgiveness. I mean, that's all they do is forgive their parents for hurting them, for rushing them through the park or whatever, thinking that next day, tomorrow might be better or something like that, right? Like, I mean, I love the idea of seeing the world through the eyes of children because it's so magical.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets to be magical. Like we get to choose that world as well if we incorporate more and more of these practices in our life. Yeah, like I don't even think I don't even call thinking imagination. Like there's something about imagination, that's attaches to visualization where we're able to let go of all the logic, um, our logical minds, right? And I think that's a real nice passage towards spiritualism and trust, being in the frequency of trust, and because that's a huge thing to step into, right? Like once you get into that frequency of trust, it's like, oh my God, your shoulders just drop. Like, right? It's that peace that
Yeah.
you talked about.
And this for me, like I had to let go a lot of what I thought I knew to be able to, really surrender into that within myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Like, I think this is going to help a lot of people. I sure hope it does. I sure hope it gives people a lot of clarity, especially when it comes to trust. And so I think in summing it up, what we could say is you learn to trust others by really trusting in yourself and finding your truth.
1000%. So often, again, the question I get asked is like, so how do you trust after them? It's like, I trust myself. I trust that I don't know what I don't yet know. I trust that I'm going to listen to myself. I'm going to listen to my soul. I'm not going to let my mind be the thing that leads or what I thought I knew. And so because I trust myself, I know I'm going to be okay. Because I trust myself, I know that I'm never going to be alone either.
Mm-hmm. Love that. Okay. Well, Jack, thanks so much for your time. And everybody, we're gonna link all Jack's stuff into the show notes as well. But I really appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And the last thing I'll just share as we leave is like this for me is like I share when you said, you hope people were helped from this episode. Like I share truths that are uncomfortable for the people who I know that it gets to help. I strongly believe in sharing our experience, our stories, our journey, whether you've had a similar experience to mine or a completely different, like we can find our own truths within each other's words. And so my invitation for everyone listening is to allow this to activate the truth within you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's
Your own truth, right?
yeah,
Like your truth, not my truth. Like you can disagree with me. Like my truth doesn't need to be your truth. Like multiple truths get to coexist, but it's like tune into your sacred wisdom.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that those last few lines would stop so much divisiveness in the world when you think about wars and religions, and it's crazy. But yeah, no, I think this is going to be super, super helpful for everyone out there. So again, Jack.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you for
Okay.
having me. Thank you for bringing this conversation forward. I am so happy that our paths intertwined this year, and I know they will continue to do so.
I agree. Absolutely. Okay, everyone else, have a good week. We'll see you here next week. Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.